is like fresh earth. Whatever you plant in that fresh earth, it will accept it. So the consequence is, if we try to deal with the issues of marriage the way they were dealt with overseas, where there was no exposure, there was no one to ask about marriage, no one to talk about, and many times you didn't see a boy or a girl until the day you got married, other than maybe your relatives. If you keep that same mentality here, where our children are constantly exposed to the opposite gender, they're going to accept those ideas of the American culture instead of accepting the ideas of Islam, because no one talked to them about it, because we didn't know how to talk about it, because nobody spoke to us about it. The consequence becomes, mashallah, look at that, I got louder. The consequence becomes, then our children say, I don't want to get married, because it's seen that marriage is almost restrictive and oppressive, as opposed to understanding what Islam truly meant in marriage. This is why this conversation is very important to have, and it has to be done very gently, and it has to be done earlier than you think it has to be done. So meaning that the actual conversations pertaining to marriage, you sometimes think, I'll talk to my child about marriage when they're done with school. I'll talk to them when they have a job. I'll talk to them when I got married at 30, my child will get married at 30, for example. But if a child is living in this environment and watching movies, which are constantly about have love and romance and these things in them, if they're going to school and their friends are in this process, if they're living in an environment that they're constantly exposed to opposite gender, to ideas, to these things, they're ready to have this conversation before you are. And they know more about this subject than we do sometimes. Which is why it's very important. You actually want to start this conversation, and I hate to frighten you, at 12 and 13. Sometimes even before 12 and 13. Why? Because kids of 12 and 13 are having relationships and dating in school. So before my child looks at these relationships in school and says, I want something like that, I need to start having the conversation about what do you actually want in your life and how do you have that relationship, which includes even the discussion about promoting marriage. That Western culture says marriage is bad. Don't get married. Why? It's a capitalistic society. The more people who are educated and have jobs, I don't want them to have one family, because that means 2 jobs, 1 sofa, 1 bed, 1 house. But if I keep them separate and say, never get married, you'll be happier on your own, that's 2 sofas, 2 houses, 2 cars, 2, 3, 4. Because a person then is satisfying their ri'ayat an-nafs, the desire of the self, the pleasure of the self. Which is why Islam says, don't look at the materialism, look and see what Allah wants from you. Which is why Allah, when He talks about marriage, He uses fi'l al-amr. The verse of Surah Nur that we began with, chapter 24, verse 32, أَنْكِهُ الْأَيَّامَ مِنْكُمْ. Marry off those who are single amongst you. Allah issues the command to get married. Meaning it's not wajib, but Allah uses such strong language to promote this attribute in our society, that marriage is matloob, it's desired. Allah wants to see you married. We see the statement of our Holy Prophet Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, Man ahabba an yalqa Allah tahiran mutahharan falyalquhu bizawjih. Whoever wants to meet Allah on the day of judgment, pure and immaculate and complete and clean in front of Allah, meet Allah as a married person. Meaning marriage is not about the material benefit that I get, but rather it is the fastest way for me to attain khair in my akhirah, to attain a great proximity with Allah. And this is the reason why marriage is something I should be teaching my children to look forward to. It's a good thing. It's something that saves your akhirah. Our Prophet would explain, and he says, Nikahu sunnati, faman raghiba an sunnati laysa minni. That nikah is my tradition. It's a practice of the Prophet. And one who stays away from my practice is not from me. When we say we love Rasulullah, we want Rasulullah's lifestyle to be our lifestyle, marriage is an important part of that conversation. Promoting that marriage and moving towards that marriage is something we want to make sure stays along in our personality. The attributes why Allah wanted this to exist, this marriage to exist. So what He gives us so many examples. Al-mutazawwij al-na'imu afdalu 'inda Allah min as-sa'im al-qa'im al-'azb. A person who is married, sleeping, earns a greater reward with Allah than a single person who spends the entire night fasting and praying. Meaning that the entire aspect is promote this attribute of marriage and move towards this marriage as quickly as you can, and it's something we should promote and talk about. Which is why when I talk to you and talk to your kids starting at 12 and 13, it's not to say that get married now, no. It's to help them build an image in their mind of who do they want to get married to someday. You see, as hormones go, and if you watch enough movie and TV, you'll want to marry someone who looks like an American because that's what they're showing you is attractive. But at 12 and 13, when you ask a child of that age, what kind of a person do you want to marry? The attributes they'll describe will be the attributes of their mother, will be the attributes of their father, will be the attributes of pious people, because that's their capacity and that's what they can understand. They have cleanliness at that time. Building that image in the mind of the child of the attributes that you want them to marry helps protect them. Because when you start selecting a spouse, there's hormones involved, there's society involved, there's culture involved, there's what's available involved. I want to lay the image in the mind of a child that there's something good that you want in your life. Talk to me about the good things you want in your life. And before they're corrupted or seeing what society has to offer, let them think about what Islam has to offer them. And this is why, when we talk about the process of marriage and what you look for in your spouse, there's an entire discussion about what's good in marriage. And if we don't do it early enough, and the opinion develops that no, marriage is bad. Why? Because I see bad examples. And there are bad examples of people who were unprepared and got married, or who didn't have a support system to help them, and then the child turns around and says, I never want to get married. But take a look and see what Rasulullah says about those who don't get married. Our Prophet says, Ashiraru mawtakum al-uzza. The worst from amongst your dead are the single people. Do you know why? It's the worst for the women, actually. Because when there's no family with you, there's no one to pray for you after you've died. There's no one to do sadaqah for you. There's no one to take care of your responsibilities. And this idea of this independence that's projected in Western culture is the concept of khair in dunya, and it has no consideration for akhirah. The structure of why marriage and family is promoted in Islam is that it's a protection for your akhirah. That by having children, by having spouses, by having relatives, by building relationships, when we leave this world, there are those who remember us, who care about us, who pray for us, who help change our book of deeds, who help add value to the affairs that we've left behind. This is why when Rasulullah says the worst amongst you, it's not that Rasulullah has a hatred. No, the worst in the ability to continue their affairs after their death, to continue to receive goodness with Allah, to continue to receive assistance are those who have no family, no relation to continue that process. There's no one who cares about them. We may think, oh, I have my brothers, my sisters, my cousins. But tomorrow if those brothers and sisters and cousins get married and move on with their life, you think they're going to prioritize you or their children? Of course, it'll be that life moves on. And which is why one of the important elements is this aspect of building these relationships and having these relationships and prioritizing them. When we look at marriage in the eyes of dunya, you're right. Said, why? Why should I limit my freedom? Why should I limit my desire and have to listen to another human being when I can be free and do whatever I want to? But that's the person who's overcome by dunya. When we start thinking about our akhirah and we start thinking about the hereafter, we start thinking these relationships, these bonds that we build are a protection for us and the easiest way for us to go to Jannah. Man tazawwaja faqad ahraza nisfa dineh. One who gets married has protected half of their faith. Why? And there's many explanations of the why. The philosophy behind why the Ahlul Bayt made this statement, one is that you fulfill the command of Allah. Allah said, Ankihu, go get married. So what? When I fulfill the commands of Allah, I fulfill my responsibility. Another explanation points to the fact that we look at our spouse the way Allah looks at us. And this is half of our faith. How? My spouse knows all of my good things and my bad things. They know the good that I do, they know the bad that I do. When someone knows you that well, how do you treat them? Do you treat them well? Do you mistreat them? Do you care for them? Do you not care for them? I should expect that Allah will treat me the same way I treat my spouse. Because the same way I knew everything good and bad of my spouse and they knew everything good and bad about me, Allah knows everything good and bad about me. So if my character is poor with my spouse, I can't expect mercy from Allah. Because when I knew something about everybody, I didn't take care of them. I didn't cover their flaws. I didn't help them. I didn't become a good partner to them. So then why should I expect that Allah will be good and kind to me when He is aware of all of my flaws and nothing is hidden from Him? So the philosophy behind this marriage is all about the akhirah. We can find value in dunya, but not every relationship will look the same. So the question comes, how do I then have an educated conversation with my child about getting married? And what are the attributes I want to promote in the process of getting married? And there's a variety of things that we did culturally that actually do have an intellectual basis. But if I can't communicate those values, no one's going to believe me. So we have some children who say, I want to get married, but I want to marry who I want, and why I want, and when I want, instead of looking and seeing what's actually good for me to get married. And sometimes we fall short in being able to explain how do we look for good characteristics in a spouse. So there are three categories we'll pay attention to. The first of them is the concept of finding what is called quf. لولا علي ما كان لفاطمة قف من آدم إلى الخاتم إلى الآخر. This statement of the Prophet was an explanation of one of the attributes that you should look for in a spouse, is what's called quf. Quf is the equivalency between a male and a female on their religious value and character. In contemporary environment, quf also refers to the concept of seeing that the income and social status has some equity in it. But the more important attribute is the concept of faith and ideology is an equivalency. And Rasulullah says, if there was no Ali, there was no one who was the spiritual equivalent of Fatima from the first of man that was created until the last of man that was created. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Quf looks at religious equivalency. And this is a really important element when looking for a spouse, to find someone who has your same religious value and same direction of what you want to achieve in your life. Many times we look and we say that my religion is my responsibility. If I love my spouse, even if they're not religious, or even if they're not someone who follows the same faith as me, it can be okay. Usually the children who say this, by the way, are the ones who have been approached by others to say, hey, I really like you. Let's get married. And the child, because they had no opinion about good or bad or what they want to get married to, they're just so impressed that somebody likes them. They say, really, you like me? Okay, let's get married. And then you turn to them and you tell them, but this person is not your equivalent. And they say, it's okay, they love me, I'm okay. That's not what we want to look at. We want to look at someone whose religiosity is equal to mine, whose opinion of faith is equal to mine. Why? The absence of iman. The true purpose of marriage is our akhirah. The goal of my spouse is to help me get to Jannah. If they don't understand my ideology, my faith, how is this person going to help me get into heaven? The first night of marriage between Amir al-Mu'mineen and Sayyidah Zahra, after that night, Rasulullah says, Ali, how did you find your wife? Amir al-Mu'mineen replies, he says, I found no better partner than her in the ibadat of Allah and building my relationship with Allah. We want to look at religion. We want to look at the understanding of Allah as part of the process of who we're willing to get married to. Marrying someone who doesn't have that, I will always be the one who is responsible for faith in my family. And if I don't represent my faith, then no one will represent my faith. This is a very important touch. That today, I grew up as a mu'min, I love Ahlul Bayt, I love Islam. If my spouse doesn't understand that, do you think they're going to educate my children on this process? Do you think they're going to hold a majlis after I die for me? They won't, because it wasn't important. They didn't have the equivalency of my faith and ideology and process. Which is why the first baseline we want to take a look at is that, is this a person who will help me go to Jannah? Is this someone who will help me raise children in the same ideology that I possess? Or will my children be without religion? Or will my children be confused in religion because my spouse doesn't understand? Now that doesn't mean that you can't have a good life in that situation. You can. But it's a lot harder. It's like having two full-time jobs. That I do my responsibilities outside, and then if I don't come and represent my faith in my house and be the representation of iman in my house, then there will be no one to represent faith in my house. But when my partner works with me and we both share that same fundamental of ideology and faith, then we work on these items together. That when I'm not talking about it, my spouse is talking about it. When I can't go, my spouse can go. And that when I am not aware of an issue, my spouse can support me and educate me and share information. It's not that we have information silos, that you are the only one who knows about this issue and I only know about these issues. So the first conversation we want to talk about is that when looking for a spouse, find someone who is your kof, your equivalency in spirituality and ideology, such that the household environment becomes one. The second attribute that we take a look at, that is very often looked at, and we have to have this conversation, is the idea about looking at culture. We see the statement of our Holy Prophet Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, تزوجوا في الحجز الصالح فإن العرق دساس. The other hadith that's very similar to this, Rasul says, تخيروا لنطفكم لأن العرق دساس. Rasulullah explains and he says, choose wisely for your family. Be very careful of the tribes that you marry into and the families you marry into, because certainly the genetics have a role and an impact in the raising of the child. This discussion talks more about the family, but first we have to talk about the culture. Is culture important when looking for a spouse? Does culture make a difference? What are the benefits of looking at culture when looking for a spouse? It's not wajib that you marry in the same culture. And it's not anything that's a restriction that you marry in the same culture. But it has certain benefits, which is why Allah says, إِنَّا خَلَقْنَاكُم مِّن ذَكَرٍ وَأُنثَى وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ لِتَعَارَفُوا. I created into families and clans so that you may know each other. That knowing each other is one of the easier ways to build an understanding between a husband and wife. I'll give you an example. Comfort food is different for every culture. For an American person, comfort food sometimes is pizza. A special food is steak. For an Afghani person, it can be Kabuli. For a Pakistani, it's biryani. When I'm feeling down and I want to eat something nice in my house, maybe, for example, from my culture, I want a samosa. But my spouse, if they have a different culture they came from, they don't understand the culture and the environment I grew up in. They don't understand how to comfort me because they had a different upbringing. The benefit of culture is it bridges the gaps and differences between husband and wife. That you start to understand each other easily because you had a similar environment to grow up in. Again, it doesn't mean that people from different cultures can't make one household. No, they absolutely can. But it requires more communication and more understanding. The same way, if for my wife, her comfort food is biryani and mine is pizza, then when I want something special, she'll make me biryani because that's what she wants. And when I want to do something nice for her, I'll bring her pizza because that's what I want. So what happened? There was a cultural difference that now we have to bridge and understand that instead of what's natural for me, how do I help you? The other element that makes cultural similarity easy is that each one of us, when we have a family and children, we want to give our children what we had growing up. I want them to have the same experiences. I want them to celebrate Eid the way I celebrated Eid. I want them to reflect on Muharram the way I did it. But if my spouse's experiences are different in a different culture, then there's a conflict sometimes of saying that, no, we should do Eid this way, this is how I did it, and someone else says, I did Eid this way. Now, these aren't unmanageable differences, but the benefit of looking in culture is that it bridges some of these gaps, so it makes it easier for us to understand and appreciate each other. Culture has a benefit. Hence, Allah created a culture so that we have these relationships and we understand each other. The bigger issue then becomes paying attention to the family. Sometimes you'll see that people want to marry into a particular family or want our children to marry into particular families. And the child says, what do I have to do with this family? Why should I care if this family is valuable or important? Here's where the hadith of the Holy Prophet come into effect. Pay attention to the family because the genetics play a role. The other thing is when I look at a spouse, a man or a woman, I can only see what they show me. But if I know the family from behind, I know the type of culture that child, that individual was raised in because I've been seeing it for generations. So I have a better idea of what this type of a person will be, how she will be in the house, how he will be in the house. Why? Because I've known your father for 40 years, or I've known this family for many years, so I have an idea of the culture they keep in their house. And therefore, looking at the family, I can many times understand things about an individual that I can't see when I speak to them. That when I have an interaction with a person, maybe I see something, maybe I don't. And that's it. Who you are today doesn't mean that's who you'll be for the rest of your life. But understanding how your family is and how your culture at home is, you may be different today, but there's a likelihood that that culture will have an impact as you grow up, that this will be your comfort zone. How you are raised is how you want to live your life. So this aspect of paying attention to family becomes important as well too, and which is why our Prophet would have many ahadith that talk about the concept of being careful and looking at your spouse's family as well as the individual, because the genetics of the family play an impact as well too, which is why the hadith of the Prophet says, إِيَّاكُمْ وَخَضْرَاءَ الدَّمٍ دِمًا قِيلَ يَا رَسُولَ اللَّهِ وَمَا خَضْرَاءُ الدِّمًا قَالَ الْمَرْأَةُ الْحَسَنَةُ فِي مُنْبَتِ السُّوءِ. Rasulullah would say, be careful of the flower that grows in manure. I said, what's the flower that grows in manure? And Rasulullah would say, a beautiful woman, but whose family, where she came from, is a family of poor character. The statement is not to say that, na'uzubillah, it's only women who can have a family of poor character. No, the attribute was to describe and say both men and women should pay attention to the family, because the attributes of the family and the character of the family plays a role in what we look at and how we live our life. So it's not to say that for example, if I don't know the family, I can't have a good marriage. No, I can. These descriptions are the reason why our cultures operated they did when we had them in the countries we came from. Here to explain to our children in the next generation why we want to look at culture, why we want to look at the family, why it's not enough to say that, oh, this person likes me and I like them, let me marry them. Is that these elements will have an impact on the relationships that we have and how we live our life. This attribute is so important in terms of finding people who understand our values and our character to get married. One of the benefits of marrying early, and especially promoting this in your children, is the aspect of protecting them from the influence of culture and society. Unfortunately, in this day and age, it's seen as common for a child to get to know many women or for a girl to get to know many guys before she decides to get married. Why? They assume there's nothing wrong. Why? I live in this culture, I'm already interacting with the opposite gender all the time. Let me take my time and find someone. But the truth is, the longer that this process waits and the longer that the process takes, the more we try to be picky about this process rather than look at the characters, iman, and values to get married, the harder it becomes to get married because there are more and more variables in my mind. Well, no, then I want someone who sits like this, I want someone who talks like this, I want someone who has this job, as opposed to looking at the fundamental characters. And the other consequence is that the value of my spouse decreases in my eyes over time the more experiences I have. How many people do you think in your world you can tell my favorite color is blue before when someone asks you what's your favorite color, you don't want to talk to them about it? The other element that takes place is sometimes, for example, our child, when we delay their marriage and they've been living in society, their opinions are colored by those that they surround themselves with. I had one situation come to me, Sheikh, I tell my husband he looks very good in a brown shirt. He doesn't believe me. I buy him brown shirts because I like the way he looks in a brown shirt, but he won't wear it. So you ask the guy, why don't you want to wear the brown shirt? He says, Sheikh, she says she likes me in brown. All the girls I've talked to in my life said I look horrible in brown. Why should I believe her? The opinion of the wife and the spouse became less valuable because there were other opinions that took the place of the spouse's opinion. It works the other way as well too. And a husband may say, I like when you cook this dish, and the woman says, no, I don't like it. Why? Because everybody else says they hate this dish that I make. These elements of society influencing the culture is one of the reasons why it promotes marriage. Don't be afraid of marriage. And it takes time to find someone in this environment, in this culture, where there are so many different people along the spectrum of iman, to find someone whose iman is a match for ours, who has the same values as ours. It's not to say that today I decide I want to get married and tomorrow I'll find somebody. Yeah, right? It's not like that anymore. It takes time to find somebody. And it's really a blessing from Allah to find a good spouse. It's a very difficult thing to find a spouse that we can build a relationship with, and therefore starting that process earlier. Now it may happen, we worry, my child has no income, my child isn't making money yet. Inshallah, someday they will. Allah is the one who says, وَأَن يَكُونُوا فُقَرَاءَ يُغْنِهِمُ اللَّهُ مِنْ فَضْلِهِ. That if you happen to be poor, if you proceed in the direction that Allah wants you to, Allah is the one who will enrich you and give you wealth. When we put our ability over the ability of Allah and the promise of Allah, is then when Allah makes us fall on our face that the opportunity doesn't come. The attribute of this is in this culture, American society, American culture, American anthropology, sociology has an opinion. 3 generations and you're ours. What that means is when you come into this country as an immigrant, you identify with where you came from before you identify with America. You see yourselves as Iraqi, Pakistani, Afghani, Irani. You see yourself as this. The second generation says, no, nus and nus. I'm a little bit American, I'm a little bit Iraqi, I'm a little bit Pakistani. The third generation says, my roots are from here, but I am from America. By the end of that third generation, the person says, I am an American first, and this is my identity first. That's the culture we're moving towards, is the adoption of the American culture. If you want to make sure that your children's culture, more than their culture, their iman becomes their first identity, facilitate the process of them following iman. Make it easy for their iman to be, and their faith to be a part of their lifestyle. I'm not worried that someone is Muslim and American. My bigger concern is that they see themselves as an American first and a Muslim second. They see the values of America before they see the values of Islam. What we want to ensure is that our children and our generation say, I am a Muslim first, then I'm an American, then I'm an Iraqi, then I'm a Pakistani, then I'm an Afghani, then I am all these other things. But my first identity is my faith. But if we make it very hard for them to find a space within Islam, we'll find it that they don't find their place in Islam and they find their place in this culture instead, and they assimilate into the culture instead of protecting their faith and iman. So this is why this discussion and being able to articulate the discussion, promoting this discussion, we can't do what was done overseas. That culture was different, the opportunities were different. Here the problems are different, the solution has to be what comes from here. Being able to talk about why you should look at iman as a part of the person you want to have as a spouse, why culture can be beneficial for us, why paying attention to the family is just as important as paying attention to the individual. And promoting this marriage quickly is something that will ensure that Islam stays a priority in our lives, and we have a good partner for our children who also prefers Islam over dunya. We raise our hands in dua again. ندعوك باسمك العظيم الأعظم الأعز الأجل الأكرم. يا الله 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 يا محمود بحق محمد يا أعلى بحق علي يا فاطر السماوات بحق فاطمة يا محسن بحق الحسن يا قديم الأحسان بحق الحسين. Oh Allah, accept this small ibadat from us. Ya Allah, give the thawab of this majlis to our marhumin, the marhumin of tonight's sponsors, and all those who are in need of dua. Ya Allah, by the right of the month of Ramadan, the Quran and the seerah of Ahlul Bayt, fulfill our hajat. Ya Allah, those who are sick in our families and our communities, give shafa'at to the mu'mineen wherever they are. Those who are suffering through strife, insecurity, and difficulty, give aman to the mu'mineen wherever they are. Ya Allah, keep our children on the upright path of Islam. Hasten the reappearance of Sahib al-Zaman. Make us and our families from the upright supporters of Sahib al-Zaman. Entitle us to ziyarat of Ahlul Bayt in this world and shafa of Ahlul Bayt in the hereafter. 1 Surah Fatiha, 3 times Surah Ikhlas with your loudest of salawat.